Welcome to Books on Tap Live from Publishers Weekly. I'm Emma Cantor, Deputy Children's Book Editor at PW, and joining me here today for our first children's episode is Daniel Bernstrom, author of Big Papa and the Time Machine, which is out now from HarperCollins Children's Books. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Emma.
Great. So before we get started, I have just a few notes for everyone watching at home. We're giving away 15 copies of Daniel's new book, Big Papa and the Time Machine. And to enter for a chance to win, go to publishersweekly.com/booksontap-live. That link will also be on the Facebook page. During the event, we also invite you, our audience, to submit your own questions for Daniel, and we will try to get to as many as possible in the last segment. So submit those again through the comment section on Facebook. Finally, if you'd like to receive updates about this series, go to publishersweekly.com/booksontap-live. And now to the fun part. So Daniel, to get us started, could you give us a brief synopsis of the story?
Yeah, so Big Papa and the Time Machine is a story about a grandfather and a grandson who go on this miraculous adventure. And the boy is nervous to go to school. So there's a young child who's nervous to go to school. And his grandfather is taking him, or his papa is taking him to school, and he doesn't want to go. And the grandfather asks, why? Why don't you want to go? Are you scared? And we don't ever really find out the reason why that child is scared, and that was done on purpose. And the grandfather says, well, let me show you something. And he turns the key on his car, on his time machine, and the engine revs, and he takes him through time, back to different moments when the grandfather had to be brave. So in a nutshell, that's the synopsis of the story.
Can you take us back to the moment when this story about the time-traveling grandfather and grandchild really came together for you?
Yes, this story's been, this is one of the oldest stories I've written. It takes a long time for stories to come about. So I wrote this in graduate school, and I wanted to write this story to capture my history. I'm, of course, African American, but I was adopted. So I didn't grow up hearing some of my family stories. So I had met my biological family for a while. And then throughout the years of me visiting Chicago and visiting my grandparents and my father, I finally said, well, I want to know the story. So I interviewed my grandfather. He was sick at the time. I didn't know that he was about to pass away. And I had a series of interviews with him over the course of several months where he would just tell me stories. So I wrote those down in a nonfiction book. And that was the book that was accepted by Harper, or that got me first noticed by HarperCollins. But working through the acquisition process, or the book has to go through like several rounds before they're saying, okay, we're going to publish this. It kind of died in acquisitions. So the editor did acquire the book, but wanted to move it toward a more more fiction storytelling element. So as we were editing it, my editor asked, now, can this have more magical realism? And I was like, magical realism? Like, seriously? Like, how do I do something like that? And I think, like, after like a moment of like a week of depression, I thought, oh, what if that car becomes a time machine that takes them back through time into these stories? And so it was an editorial ask that was, can there be more magical realism, that pushed me to go, let me make a time machine.
Well, that magical element really gives more depth to the story. It's sort of like a magical history tour. which is so rich. And I'm curious about the vehicle that drives the plot, the 1952 Ford. Is there a special significance behind that particular model of car?
Yeah. So with the car, so why the car? If you walked into my papa's bedroom or where it was more like an office, on his shelves, he had a series of shelves. He would have cars, these model cars. And there was one car that he had over and over and again. It was the 1952 Ford. And it was his first car. And it was everywhere. Larger size, smaller sizes. And that's what he loved to do. Whenever we would go, he'd take me out driving. And every time just to tour Chicago, show me different pieces of where he worked and how he helped build Chicago as a mason. And imagine imagine that as a young African American boy just spending time with your grandpa like that, and he's just pointing out how he helped build Chicago, and he's just telling stories the entire time. I didn't have to say anything. He would just talk and I would just listen. And so when I thought of a time machine, I thought of what would make me think of my grandfather the most? What would be his favorite car? So the 1952 Ford. And then that idea of stories that are that sort of magical time machine. Because if you've ever been in a good story, time disappears. You forget where you are, and you can almost envision. A good storyteller can make you envision the setting and bring you in. So that's why the car in the 1952 Ford.
You mentioned that sadly your grandfather didn't get to see this book, but have you had the opportunity to share it with other members of your family?
Yes, my father, my biological father, I mean, we talk regularly, and have a very, very good relationship now. And he called and said, "Thank you so much for writing it. I didn't know. I didn't have some of these stories." And as a English instructor, one of the essays that I typically assign students is to do an interview where they have to call someone and just ask them questions about their life. And I get a very similar response is, I didn't know that about my grandfather. I didn't know that about my mother or my father. Same thing with my dad, who he didn't know some of these things about Papa. And so that response was, thank you. Thank you for capturing some of these family stories. So I know it's fiction, but a lot of it is nonfiction. A lot of it's real. The fictional element is the time machine and the the young child and the grandfather. So and then my daughter, I have a second grader. She has loved reading it. They'll take the book and they'll go upstairs to her bedroom and she'll read the story, or my other little children will flip through the pages. And it's really special to me because they're it's not just it's not just any book. It's part of our family history that other people get to share.
The book gives us a close up of this family's story, as you described, and it also opens up into a larger portrait, in some ways, of African American history. There are moments of joy and struggle. Thinking of the moment when Big Papa leaves his home in Little Rock to go to Chicago to look for work, when he sets eyes on his future wife for the first time at the Blues Club. That's such a moment of joy. And also when he takes on the role of primary caregiver of the grandson. I'm interested, how did you select these poignant moments to focus in on? And how did you think about what to include in the frame?
That is a good question. Uh, it's hard to answer because it was just a matter of trying to feel out what moment stuck with me. And Papa was part, because I asked Papa, I said, why did you leave? Why did you leave the South? Why did you leave Tennessee? And that was his answer. Just needed to find him a better job. And and he loved fried fish, and it seems so ridiculous that would be his answer, that I would just want to eat. But that tells you that, what does that tell you about some of his history? I've met other I teach many immigrant students, and that's been an answer also, is, why did you come to the United States? Because I needed to eat. So there were these just moments when he would tell these stories, and there'd just be something in them that he would say that would strike me. And then what I would do is I would do research. So I'd say, well, okay, why did he leave? And then I read, it was Isabel Wilkerson's book about the Great Migration. And he was part of that Great Migration, and he settled in Chicago. Or then when he met Nana at the Blues Club, I'd asked, where did you meet Nana? And he just told me about how much he loved dancing, and how he met, his first dance with Nana, and how special that was for him. I had no idea. Here's my papa sitting in a chair. I couldn't imagine him dancing, and being so full of life, and so just the joy that was in his eyes made me want to include that piece of the story. And then when he adopted my father, so it's a little interesting, because my father was adopted, and he was then I was adopted. It's kind of a weird story there. But when he accepted my father, it was hard. He was a touch older. He he had he was working as a mason. It's very hard work. I think he'd thrown out his back several times, and he was laid up. And when you work a manual job with no security, it can be very scary. And then all of a sudden a baby is brought into your home, and you don't know if you're going to be able to feed him. Some of those old fears, right? I struggle to eat. Am I going to be able to provide for my child? And he was very afraid to do that. But he did. Uh, so I would listen to him, and then the stories would come up, and then I think whatever kind of struck me is what I included in the book.
At a sentence level, the dialogue is very conversational, but it also has this element of poetry or even music. Does that style come instinctively to you? I noticed it in some of your earlier books too.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think when I write, I hear music, and it's not a even my advisors in graduate school would point that out. They would say, your prose is lyrical, and I don't try to do that. I just write in whatever sounds beautiful to me. Because I'm visually impaired, when I write, I put it in my computer, and my computer speaks back to me. So um, that way I can listen for any, if sometimes when I'm typing, I don't type what I thought I typed. And so when the computer talks back to me, I can, oh, that's not what I wanted to write. So then I fix it. So a lot of my writing process is I type it in, and the computer is speaking back to me as I'm going. So is it because of that I'm listening to everything that I write? But that's just what I hear when I'm writing. I hear this. So it doesn't matter if it's prose, or if it's a purposeful rhyming picture book, or Big Pop in the Time Machine. One of my good friends pointed that out to me. He said, all your books are poetry. And I'm like, no, I didn't write a book. I didn't write a poem. I didn't write a book of poetry. Big Pop in the Time Machine. He's like, that's poetry. uh, it, I guess that's just what I hear, and what's in what comes out. So when I talk to people that want to be writers, or that wonder where their writing voice is, I often say, well, it's already there. Your writing voice or who you are as a writer isn't a fabrication. You don't try to be somebody else. It's already part of who you are, and it's going to be so boring that you're not even going to think of it as unique, because it's just who you are. And I would answer that question the same way. The way I write is it's just part of me, and I don't know how it happens.
In keeping with that poetic element, you offer a refrain in the voice of Big Papa that's called Being Brave. Can you talk about how this story is an example of everyday bravery and why you felt compelled to share it?
So much of bravery is not in the big things that we do. And we want to, I think, stand up against something, and that's fine. Or we want to change, make a large change. But anyone who knows habits, or anyone who knows how we're built as people, it's hard to establish a good habit, or it's hard to spend time with your kids. I'm a busy person, and I work I work as an instructor at a community college, and I has I work as an author, and I'm tired, and my kid wants to come and spend time with me or play trains. I would rather just sit and just veg on the couch. It's hard, but it's brave to do to think out. It's brave to love somebody else. And that's what I found in Papa's stories, is when he when he left the South to come to a new place. It was very hard to leave his family, but his cousins came with. He did send money back, like so many people. He he wanted something more than just for himself. When he met Nana, just I love that bravery of seeing something beautiful, or being or wanting to be part of a family, and the fear that goes in with that. And it's not just something that happens. It requires a conscious decision to be uncomfortable and to be frightened. Children. I have 4 children of my own. It's terrifying when you have a little baby in your arms and you're like, please stay alive. Please stay alive. I don't know how to do this. And I think being a father is the husband and a father has been the most difficult, greatest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And it's asked me to be brave. And so when I thought of my papa and what he's done, he's I felt like he was telling me, no matter what challenge you face, to be brave is going to require everything of you, but it's in the little things that's going to add up to this great bravery. And he dealt with more than I did. Um, I'm very privileged compared to what my papa was, and he struggled a lot, and it meant a lot coming from him.
The illustrations by Shane W. L. Evans also drive the story in some ways and serve as another vehicle for the narrative. Because this is such a personal story to you, did you have contact with him throughout the illustration process and input?
One thing I've been fortunate to have is I've had one editor throughout my entire um, writing career, and it's been my editor, Jill Davis. And she is highly collaborative. Every single book I've worked on, there has been some communication between the author and the illustrator. Shane, on the other hand, um, almost demanded that we meet and we talk. And we did. We talked several times about the story, and Shane was fully invested. And we had a couple private conversations. Uh, we I would see some of the art, and I would maybe make a comment back. He was phenomenal to work with, and the just how much he felt the story and how he illustrated the book. I think I think it's masterful, and I hope he gets recognized. No, not for my selfish reason, but what he did in the art was phenomenal, and it blew me away as an author to be able to witness that. And he the way that he made the memory so fuzzy, and it's almost like you're trying to look at them and trying to see the details, but you can't. And I'm like, oh, Shane, you're brilliant. You're brilliant. And I told him that. Uh, how did he think of that? I don't know, but we did talk. It was collaborative, and I really respect Shane Evans, and I have a lot to learn from him.
As you said earlier, the book is really an exploration of time and of sharing stories across generations. How does it feel for the book to be out now at this particular moment in history? We have so many monumental things happening with the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, and of course, an election coming up.
It's surreal that this book is out at this time, and but I think that this book is appropriate in so many ways for this. I think of when my papa told me, it's like racism was in the North. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It wasn't in Chicago. He's like, yep, there were white and black bathrooms. He had or most of his working career, he was pushed out of a union environment, and he struggled. Uh, white white workers could be in the union, but he couldn't because he was black. Eventually, it was a white supervisor that took him to go get his union card. And later on, when Papa was sick, it was because of the union benefits that kept him alive, as long um, as they did. So he experienced a ton of racism, and we he would tell me about it. I mean, he would tell me to act in a certain way that would make African Americans proud. He would say, people are looking at you, people are judging you always, and the way you act will reflect how we're perceived. That was what he would tell me. So, in coming from his life, I could tell that he really meant it and he lived it, and he tried to do that as best he could. But the biggest thing wasn't so much his stories about um, fighting that union battle, or confronting racism, as much of it was he always tried to treat other people with love, dignity, and respect. Everyone. And that's what he wanted me to do. No matter what I faced, that's what he wanted. And you could say, should he have fought? I think activists are wonderful. I think there's a place for activists, but a lot of people ask me, or I've been asked, what do I do? As a parent, what do I do during this time of pandemic? As a parent, what do I do during this time of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter? I'm, I might go to a rally, but what do I do? Well, love. I think St. Mother Teresa said that if we spent time loving our families, we would change the world. And I think, how important is it to take those small moments of bravery and hold your kid and read to them, go on a walk with them, figure out how they experience love. And the pandemic, how hard, I think parents, I've realized our kids have been home from school. They haven't been at school. We've had to do homeschooling. It's really hard. I really appreciate teachers. I appreciate them so much. But how many of us have been stressed by our kids? How many of us have been maybe short with them when we shouldn't have? Are we apologizing to them? Are we showing them how to love so they can share that love with other people? And I think that's what, if I could offer one thing for this time, is can we share love with as many people as our society is looking for meaningful change and um, yeah, meaningful change and respect for all, for Black lives, for Black lives.
The importance of school is another big theme in the book, with the grandpa sharing that he wasn't afforded the opportunity to get a formal education. And so he shows pride and hope for his grandson who is about to embark on that journey. I saw in your bio that you are a teacher.
I am. I am a teacher. I teach English at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. And that's a whole story. That's a whole story in itself. Being finally being able the opportunity to teach at an institution of higher ed. It's difficult. I'm not gonna talk about institutional racism or anything like that. It's just there was a faculty member that told me it would take 6 to 8 years, and just generally that's what it took. It took me 6 to 8 years to become a faculty member, and I walked in, and I think it was because of the work that's been happening within the Minnesota state system that when I stepped in, that the search committee was willing to, because I didn't have the greatest depth of experience. They stepped in and they said, yes, we believe he meets all the qualifications and he'll be a good fit here. And I've loved working where I am, but that's been a huge thing. And Papa told me when he was so proud that I was getting my master's. He was so proud of getting my master's, and so was my father. It was a huge thing. And education was very, very important to him.
So you teach higher education, but are drawn to picture book writing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. Is that weird?
No, they're the youngest students. Have you always felt drawn to that age range? Do you ever see yourself branching out?
I I thought that I was gonna be like this like super serious young adult, edgy young adult writer. And I applied to all the best graduate programs in the nation, to Iowa, to Minnesota, to Wisconsin. I was rejected by all of them. I was just shut down. Then I applied to Hamlin, and as for children, I didn't realize that what I was writing was children's, and it was more young adult, and Hamlin University accepted me. Then I met a picture book writer, like Caldecott Award winner Jacqueline Briggs Martin. She was my advisor. I was assigned to her, and she said, basically, let's try some picture books. And I'm like, oh, but I'm serious. I'm a big, important young adult writer. I don't write picture books. She's like, no, let's write picture books. I started writing picture books. I think it helped that I had a great teacher to get started, because she made sure I did the right thing. And then from her, I went to another great picture book writer named Phyllis Root, and that's how I started writing picture books. And I literally thought less of picture books, but picture books are harder to write by far. I can write a novel faster than I can write a picture book. It was just it was a huge shift for me. So I completely stumbled into picture book writing by accident, completely by accident. thanks to Hamlin.
And that makes sense, though, for the poetry we were talking about earlier, lending itself to picture books.
Yeah, I think I do pinch myself because um I I was in broadcasting is what my bachelor's degree was in, and then I have a rare eye disease and it was taking my vision away. And so I couldn't stay in broadcasting because I couldn't operate the computer in that way. That's the technology reading it back to me. So I decided that I would get I liked writing. I did a lot of it. So I thought I'd get a master's degree in writing so I could end up teaching. That was the goal. It wasn't to write. It was to get a master's of fine arts in writing because I wasn't good at writing. I was terrible at punctuation. I was terrible at spelling. I had to teach myself those things. And so I thought, well, I can't be a real English teacher. So let me be a fake English teacher. And that's what I thought. That's how I got into graduate school. So many wrong things. But I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think I could do it. And so I got into Hamlin. I did the I finished the degree so I could, be a fake teacher. And one of my instructors said, you should publish." I said, "No, no, no, no. There's other great writers, not me." "No, you should publish, and these are the books that you should think about trying to publish." So I've been fortunate and blessed to have allies that have helped me to move on to where I am today. Definitely.
So,
And for the record, I don't think MFAs are fake writers, okay? I'm just saying that was my misconception.
noted. So it's about time now to switch gears and accept questions from our viewers at home. We have some great submissions already. One from Karina Enriquez, who asks, "What did you learn about yourself while writing the book?"
Well, I learned that I guess there's a lot of pain that I hadn't experienced. I hadn't grown up with some of those stories. Now, I had a loving family, and I'm very thankful for that family, but there's always a sense of loss. And it was beautiful to be part of, to hear part of my history and to be part of that. But I think, yeah, I didn't realize how sad I was to how much I missed not growing up with those stories.
And you were able to turn that, though, into a joyful story and this time capsule in itself, this book to share. It's
Well,
really special.
thank you.
So we have another question. This one is from Nancy Verdolino, who is a teacher and curriculum leader. She is curious about your research process and any suggestions or sources that you might recommend for elementary and middle school students interested in U.S. history, specifically of people of color.
One thing, it's there's more about it, but I would look up the Great Migration, and there's been a couple picture books about it, and of course, there's Isabel Wilkerson's work, amazing work. But look up the Great Migration because I think that helps. That's kind of that in between period between, um, so the Civil War, then you have Jim Crow, where even though the Civil War had ended and African Americans were free, so the slaves were free, there were a system of laws that were set in place to manipulate and subjugate African Americans. Well, they were free. No, some of those laws were meant to keep African Americans in the South. but others migrated and they fled, and millions spread across the United States, especially into the north. And the reason why I'm really pushing on I'm really pushing on the Great Migration, and I think students should do more researching that, is especially with this George Floyd and some of these shootings that are happening, that we always think of racism in the South, but we don't talk about some, why there might be some racial unrest in the North. And to a certain degree, the South is working through and has worked through many many issues, but the North, um, the divided Chicago's divided into basically a white and black side. Where I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, it was white and black. Literally, the river divided. So I really wonder how much. I feel if we did more study in the Great Migration, we would understand more about how racial unrest and racial equality, it wasn't settled in the North.
One of the things that struck me about your book is this structure centered around dialogue between the grandfather and grandson. And you really leave space for readers to seek out the adults in their own lives, to ask these questions and look into the history.
Yeah, that I really want, and that was another editorial suggestion because the story was really long. So my editor just kept asking me where I could cut. So I finally just cut out all the description, and there was the dialogue that was left. And she's like, "This works." Great, I mean, I'm wordy. I like to talk, as clearly. So so that's kind of what happened. But that was it. That was the heart of what I learned about from Papa is this dialogue back and forth. But that's love, to talk with somebody, to understand them, to not make a rash judgment, but to try to understand where they're coming from. The big Papa not demanding the little boy or the child go into school. Like, you will go into school and you will make me look good. But hey, let me sit with you. Let me wait with you. Let me dialogue with you. And I think it's that's how I think children feel loved. And that's how I felt loved. And I hope other adults extend that type of love toward children, maybe when they're not doing what they're supposed to. So I think, yeah, so I think it touches on that dialogue structure, really touched on many levels of how I felt loved by Papa.
Onto the subject of representation, we have a question here from Joe Solar, who asks why you feel it's so important to share stories of Black characters for all readers.
I think that each writer has their own purpose or their own theme that they want to express. For me, I want people to understand the I want people to read stories about African Americans, Black, as everyday stories. I think when you there yes, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in the history of African Americans, but there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of life and there's a lot of things that anyone can relate to. And that's been my thing that I want most, is I don't want kids to grow up just thinking that this is okay, it's Martin Luther King, so it's a Black story. I want kids to just here, let me just pick up this book, and it doesn't matter who the color is. Um, it's a story, and then guess what? Because I have Black history, that goes in there, but I don't deliberately try to tell that story. It's just part of who I am. And if it's part of my fabric, or it's part of my experience, it just goes in there and it's just a story. And I think that's, for me, that's really important. I don't know. Yeah, I'd be interested to see if people disagree with me, but that's my heart, and I want to do more of that.
Maeve Noth asks, are there books from your childhood that had a major impact on you?
That's good. Well, yeah, childhood. I think Jacqueline Woodson, I think she did it with The Other Side of the Fence. She's just a brilliant writer in general. The Other Side of the Fence really, that's moved me in many levels, in many ways. Patricia Polacco's book, Pink and Say, where along those veins. But just stories. I love stories, and I love listening to people tell stories. So if you want, just general influences, I love listening to people, and I love the stories that they tell. And I think you could Big Pop in the Time Machine, just like it's that kid who just says, "Please tell me a story," and I'm gonna listen, and I'm gonna write it down because I think it's beautiful.
We have a question here from a member of our marketing team at PW, Stacy Gill. She asks, do you imagine doing another book or even a series with these two characters from Big Papa and the Time Machine? She feels like there's more to say.
I hope. So I do have the second book. I do have the second book written. So, and it wasn't me. It was actually Shane. Shane's like, I think there's more here, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. He's great. I think there's more here. So I have that. I have that written. I have that book written, and it all depends. Okay, so big publishing reveal. It all depends on sales. If the book sells really well, then the publisher will say like, "Yay, we'll publish another one." Maybe I'm not supposed to say that. So sorry, but that's so I hope there's a series. I hope, because I have in my mind I have 3 more books. So more of this story, because I learned so much. And I have more of these beautiful stories about bravery and love, and I hope I get to tell them. So fingers crossed. I hope that this can be a series and I can share more of this time machine story. So help me do that, I guess.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, I really hope that this conversation piqued everyone's interest to go out and get the book for themselves and for young readers.
Yeah, I hope they find the love in the story. And I hope that they, in turn, want to start sharing more stories back and forth. I think that we can be ashamed of our stories, or we think that our stories aren't important. How did you meet? How did you meet the person you love? What was your job like? Did you mess up during school? That's it. That's the magic of Big Papa. And guess what? That's the magic of your life too. So be brave, tell your story, and in doing that, you're showing immense amount of love.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a great conversation. And thank you to everyone watching at home.
Thank you.
A few announcements before we wrap up. We have our next Books on Tap live event scheduled next Wednesday, July 22. It is with Ryan T. Higgins, author-illustrator of We Will Rock Our Classmates, a back-to-school picture book. So sign up to receive a reminder of that event and any other future events in the series at publishersweekly.com/booksontap live. Thanks so much, and we hope to see you then.